Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be the host. And with me I have a great friend of Progressive Soup, an esteemed scholar of local politics. And I want to start off the show briefly because, it's no secret that Mark Boughton and I have had some political issues with each other. Some, oil and vinegar amongst other things. But, I've taken him to task on some issues that I frankly disagree with him on. But I saw an article in Connecticut Magazine a month or so ago. And in the article, he spoke about the new gun control law and said some things that I felt were very, very, very intelligent, very bold. He made some statements about, he compared the gun control legislation in Connecticut to the legislation in New York State. And basically said that the legislation in New York State was much better. It was tougher in terms of gun control specifically, but more importantly, it also delves a lot more and spends a lot more energy on dealing with the psychological aspects of people that do these horrendous things. And I thought it was a terrific statement on his part, and kudos to him for that. Having said that, he seems to have taken a different tack since then, and I'll let you enlighten me on that because I noticed it. But Al, nothing escapes Al's eyes, and Al noticed the same. I don't know. I don't like to use the term flip-flopping because it gets overused, but this truly was a change of position since he became a candidate for governor. And Al, tell us about it.
Well, before I get into that, I want to thank you for allowing me to come back on the show. It's been a long time since I've been back here at Comcast Studios.
Back home, always a pleasure.
Wow, it just sucked you back in, I guess. So again, thank you very much.
It's those ratings that do it, right?
Oh yeah. Popularity and all. But again, thank you for allowing me to come back on the show, and hopefully I will be making many more appearances on this show as well as other shows in the area to talk about local politics as well as state politics, because I think it's important for people to truly understand what's going on here, especially when it comes to our esteemed mayor, or I like to call it dishonest mayor, Mark Boughton.
Don't you call him the last honest man in Danbury?
He is the very last honest man in Danbury. I mean that as a joke because he's not really honest when it comes to a lot of issues. And primarily, we want to talk about guns.
Don't get snarky with conservative people because it's a different mindset. It's a different way of looking at it. I've learned through the years that, with no disrespect to people who are conservative in nature, but it works a lot better in conversation with them if you're just straight. Tell it like it is. Don't be snarky. Don't be sarcastic. Because sometimes they don't really. Not as quick to get it as we snarky liberals are.
Well, let's be straightforward and to the facts with this. All right. As you know, the horrible tragedy in Sandy Hook happened quite a while ago, and the mayor took a stance in regards to guns, loopholes in the gun law that we have right now, and things that should be looked at and examined and possibly reevaluated, such as like background checks, assault weapons, magazines, grips on guns, things of that nature that, you don't, if you're going out hunting deer, why do you need a clip that holds like so many bullets? Why are there certain areas where the background checks, there's loopholes in it that I think everybody would agree, at least by polling in Connecticut, overwhelmingly, the majority of the people support re-examination of the gun laws and modifications to the gun laws so that these loopholes can be taken care of. The mayor took a stance on that after the tragedy in Sandy Hook. He joined a group called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. All right, that was created by Mr. Bloomberg, mayor of the city, who was the previous mayor of New York City. And the mayor, he was a part of the group, as well as a lot of other mayors in the state of Connecticut. Now, the mayor had no problem being a part of that group. The mayor had no problem taking a stance against guns. Of course, he was, Danbury is adjacent to Newtown, very close, and we're neighbors. And what happened in Newtown affected everybody in the greater Danbury.
Also, being a city, gun violence is more prevalent because you have more people concentrated in a smaller area than out in the countryside. Right. And guns, you have more, the traffic issues and, things that crop up in cities where people can lose their cool quickly. And having the gun in the hands of somebody that gets angry is probably not a real good idea.
No.
And that happens more often, certainly, in cities where we're congested, where we're toe-to-toe with people constantly.
Yeah, and the mayor, to his credit, took a very strong stance against some of the things that are in our gun laws that just don't make a lot of sense. In fact, there was a gun show that happened that was supposed to happen not long after the Sandy Hook tragedy down at the old Hilton. I think it's called the Crown Plaza now.
Correct, yep.
And the mayor was like, hey, look, you gotta be kidding me. And he took a strong stance against that, and the show was canceled for a certain amount of time because it was very insensitive to the people in Sandy Hook. Let's fast forward a little to the present time, and what happened was two individuals who are running for mayor, for governor, on a Republican ticket, John McKinney, state senator, and Mark Boughton, took a lot of flack from people, not in the Republican Party, but I want to call it the fringe element of the Republican Party, who are just crazy.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough. I'm staying on the facts here. Yeah. And they just kept going after Mark, and they kept going after Mr. McKinney constantly. And because Mark Boughton has a very big history of catering towards the fringe or flip-flopping towards flip-flopping on certain topics, whether it's illegal immigration, when 10 years ago he wanted to have a day laborer center at Kennedy Park, and he flip-flopped once the fringe element of his base said, hey, no to illegal immigration.
And so we ended up with ICE,
and we ended up
very bad program.
And we ended up with the present Mayor Boughton, who suddenly is against illegal immigration, when 10 years prior he wasn't like that. Same thing when it comes to guns. Suddenly, out of nowhere, probably for political purposes, are pandering to his fringe element of his base.
He can certainly speak to that point.
Yeah, he decided to, out of nowhere, step away from the organization, Bloomberg's organization, and say that, suddenly out of nowhere, the Bloomberg's group became very active in terms of anti-gun, although there's really no evidence to support that. He basically pandered towards an element of his base in order to get political points to become the Republican nominee for governor. He knew he was taking a considerable amount of heat. John McKinney's taking a lot more heat. But Mark was taking a good amount of heat, and he knew he had to make a calculated choice. And this is one of the problems I have with Mark Boughton. He's just very dishonest, whether it's guns or political contributions or his stance on topics. He panders. He will pander towards whatever it is the popularity within the fringe element of his base.
Where are the other candidates for governor in the Republican Party? Where are they on this, specifically on this gun issue?
Well, when it comes down to it, the only two people who were in support of gun control, sensible gun control, and I think it's very important to say sensible gun control, because the law that was passed was sensible. We're talking about background checks. We're talking about, why do you need to have these huge magazines in your guns? And you have these fringe elements here saying, hey, they're coming to take our guns away.
The ability to kill 26 people in less than 3 minutes.
It's tragic. It's tragic, and it makes no sense. I mean, if you're shooting a deer, you don't need something like that.
Yeah, and most of the people that I know that I would call liberal or progressive have no problem with hunters. In fact, in Brookfield, they do bow hunting from up in a tree. They thin out. They call the deer population, and legitimate hunting using weaponry that it's more than just
It's deer hunting. Lyme disease in deer.
Yeah.
It's a big issue in Reading.
Sure,
being taken care of very well. And again, this is not about, let's be honest about this. This is not about gun control. This is not about hunting and stuff. This is about a certain element of the Republican Party who are dead set against anything that has anything to do with the president or a progressive agenda, okay? And in terms of guns, they will gin up and do crazy things to make an argument that doesn't make any sense. Not only not make any sense, but it's factually not true. Mark Boughton is catering towards that fringe element because he knows when it comes to convention time, when it comes to primary time, he needs those votes to get him over the top, to get that nomination. Now, I'm quite certain that if he becomes the nominee, sometime in September, he might change his topic and change his flip again and become more moderate. Say, hey, I'm a blue collar, truck driving, moderate Republican. And he'll play to that base because he knows that after the primary,
Interesting.
he'll have to play. He'll have to play
visual.
He'll have to play towards the common Connecticut person, the landed steady habits, the moderate, but not too much to the fringe type of Republican, somewhere in the middle. You know, that's what Connecticut's all about. I love when Republicans or people in the fringe say that, Connecticut's so liberal. I'm like, well, the last time it was a liberal governor was Bill O'Neill back in the 1980s, prior to Dan Malloy. And as I recall, they'll say, hey, what about the state income tax? We got to get rid of this thing. Those liberals in Harvard, they had. Well, wait a second. Hold on a second. Now, John Rowland was the governor, if I recall, after Weicker. And after Rowland, there was Jody Rell. And as I recall, during a certain amount of time during Rowland's administration, there was a lot of Republicans up there at the General Assembly.
And it seems like all of them recognized the fact that, of course, cost Lowell Weicker his political life, but it was a tax that at the time certainly needed to be brought in to drag Connecticut out of a fiscal crisis.
And then you had plenty of Republicans up there. You had multiple opportunities because you had a Republican governor. You had plenty of opportunities to see a proposal to repeal the state income tax. I never heard anything from Rowland or Rell about that. But
and I think it was destined to be sunsetted in the beginning. It had a life expectancy of I don't know how many, 4 years or 6 years or something, and it somehow managed to get beyond that because.
Well, it's one of the old notions that if you ever give a politician a money stream, they're not going to shut it off.
Cynics would say that there's no such thing as going back on taking money taking money in the form of taxes, and that's I think a cynical way of looking at life, but it's what I've heard throughout the decades.
So, but going back to Mark, the problem I have with Mark, and the problem I've always had with Mark is he's just straight up dishonest. He's a very dishonest. He's probably one of the most dishonest politicians I've ever met.
Judge the behavior, not the person. So let's stick to the things that he's done, which match the statement.
I think the gun flip flop is a perfect example of this, and he took a considerable amount of heat across the state in terms of editorials, in terms of statements that are being made by people who are connected with victims of the Sandy Hook tragedy. For going back on his word and putting politics before people. And I think it's a prime example of Mark being dishonest with the people of not only in Danbury but the people in the state in general. And there's a whole other host of topics and examples of this which will come out in time because thankfully we're in a situation now where Mark's not being under the spotlight of the News Times or the local media, which has been atrocious. But now we have a statewide media who's taking a close look at this candidate and saying, hey, wait a second, we have a lot of questions about this guy.
And it seemed to be the case when he ran for lieutenant governor 4 years ago when, my personal opinion, he hurt Tom Foley's chances because he did fairly well, not super well in Danbury. Of the cities in Connecticut, Mark Boughton was, for lack of a better word, outed by the media in every other city that showed that he was not a guy you wanted one step away from the governorship.
Well, I think one of the problems that Mark had back then is that you're looking at 2010 and the media was starting to take a closer look at Mark. Now it's 4 years later, I have a much better understanding of what Mark is, and they're really asking tough questions.
Yeah.
But back then, the topic back then in 2010 was illegal immigration.
It was.
And illegal immigration in urban areas just does not sell, especially what Mark was doing. It does not sell whatsoever. And I think Foley felt that hurt him in areas such as Bridgeport, Norwalk, especially in New Haven, Hartford.
Yeah.
That probably lost him votes. I don't think Tom Foley's looking at, hey, I lost the race for governor because of Bridgeport. I think he lost the race because of urban areas and what Mark Boughton represented to Hispanics and Latinos in terms of being like anti-immigrant. And no matter what Mark Boughton can say right now, there's an albatross around his neck for the rest of his life because he put that there. Nobody told him to become an anti-immigrant mayor.
Let's back up a second and tell the audience about ICE. Is ICE still in effect in Danbury?
No.
Okay.
There is no more.
Tell us the history of ICE.
Well, the history of ICE goes back to several years back, and there was an effort, in my opinion, to make the issue of illegal immigration a political tool. There is no need for ICE access in this city. There is no need for it. I lived in Danbury. I've lived in Danbury since 1987. I've never had a problem. I've never seen a problem in terms of immigrants and crime that rise to the level in which you needed to have a program that was anywhere else in the state. We're the 7th largest city in the state of Connecticut, and somehow that we, the 7th largest city, needed ICE access where the other 6 larger cities did not need that, including Hartford, Bridgeport, Norwalk, Waterbury, New Haven. They didn't need that, but somehow Danbury needed that. What was the urge for that? The urge for that was due in large part because there was people on the city council who said, "Hey, look, we can do this for political points. We can do this to gin things up. We can do this to make a statement." And Mark played that up because he knew it would earn him more political points.
What he didn't seem to know, though, and there was quite an uproar about it before it actually was instituted in Danbury, is that everything has unintended consequences. And it appeared to me, and you, those of you in the audience that know any of the Danbury detective squad, it seemed to be that before we had ICE, members of the varying immigrant communities were very willing to talk to detectives and out anybody in their group that was misbehaving, doing something wrong. They were very quick to do that because nobody wants to be dragged down by a friend or a family member or anybody that they have a camaraderie with. Nobody wants to be dragged down by somebody else's bad behavior.
Well,
so say without. Now, once ICE was in place, now everybody was very reluctant to talk to the detective squad and give them information because a piece of information could lead to an entire family or more being picked up in the middle of the night and out of town to who knows where.
Well, and again, when you have a situation where you have collateral arrest, which means the police can come in and target, say, we're looking for this one individual. He has an ICE detainer or something like that.
Yeah.
And what happens is the cops will come in and ask everybody in the room, show your ID. And what happens is if you don't have your Know Your Rights training, which basically says, hey, look, cops ask you for something like that, say, look, I'm not telling you anything until I have a lawyer. I don't have to say anything to you.
Right.
When you see a cop come in your place at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you become afraid. Say, hey, look, I don't have ID. I'm here illegally, and you get picked up also. That's their game plan. People
that were doing nothing wrong, other than looking for an opportunity to become part of this great nation.
And that came to a head with the Danbury 11 case, where Danbury police, and let me repeat this again, because the mayor for a number of years said that Danbury police had nothing to do with that raid. Danbury police posed as undercover contractors, went to Kennedy Park, picked up a number of people who appeared to be undocumented. They had no evidence whatsoever to say they were undocumented whatsoever. They were just standing there waiting for work. Picked them up and brought them down to the police station. Completely illegal, because at the time local police did not have the authority to enforce federal law. immigration law.
Correct.
And
separation of federal law and local.
And it had a big
law.
thing to do with the settlement that because the city of Danbury settled that case, and
paid out a fair amount of money.
Paid out a lot of money.
Do we know how much money that cost the city of Danbury? Taxpayers?
Well over $500,000. At least the settlement plus the legal bills was well over $500,000. And I think the city of Danbury learned a very good lesson in terms of that. But more importantly, the mayor throughout the entire episode misled the public every step of the way about the city's involvement with that case. Another case of dishonesty. So we have a pattern here where the mayor just constantly is misleading the public. And it was okay when he did that in Danbury because you had a local media who just didn't really care or didn't follow or didn't ask tough questions. Of course.
Or there's a very close connectivity, and I think it's fair to bring this up because people will tell you, a lot of people will tell you that look at the names and the faces in the mayor's office, the names and the faces down at the News Times, that these have become interchangeable parts.
When you have Wayne Shepherd as the mayor's chief of staff, and if anybody wants to learn about Wayne Shepherd and his affiliation with the News Times, just do a Google search, and you'll learn that, and it raises eyebrows. And when you look at the recent coverage and the recent editorials that's been written by the New Haven Register, the Register Citizen, the Journal Inquirer, in terms of Mayor Boughton's sudden change in terms of guns, and a harsh but correct and fair critique of the mayor in terms of his.
We want you to read that. We want you to find those articles and read them, and don't take our word for it. Judge them for yourself, please.
Read them up for yourself, and then you read what the News Times came out with. It baffles the mind. Sunday's paper that happened this Sunday was a huge piece. It must have been well over 1,500 words, maybe 2,000 words. It was a huge piece on the mayor's campaign for governor and talking about his inner circle and how they're bringing in. I mean, this happened a few days after he's been getting beaten up by every other paper in the state over his stance on guns, over his stance with his connection with Lisa Wilson Foley, and how he basically lied to the public and he said, hey, Lisa Wilson Foley never gave to my campaign for governor. And come to find out, well, if she did give contributions to your campaign for governor, your exploratory campaign for governor.
Backtrack for a second and tell us who Lisa Wilson Foley is.
Lisa Wilson Foley is she was the candidate for lieutenant governor in 2010 who ran against Mark Boughton in the primary in 2010 for the lieutenant governor spot. There was some very bad blood between those two candidates. If anybody recalls, Lisa Wilson Foley put up a series of lawn signs, littered Danbury with her lawn signs. And if you know anything about politics, you don't come to somebody's backyard and put up lawn signs. You're gonna get the other person a little upset about that.
Probably not a very diplomatic thing to do.
Not very diplomatic, and it's a thumb in the eye. So there was no love lost between those two. And if anybody knows anything about Mark Boughton, he has a very short temper, a very thin skin. So those two were really going at it for quite some time, and suddenly everybody became buddies. One thing about Mark Boughton, it's all about the money. All about the bottom line. It's about shaking that money tree.
Well, they say that's become the thing in politics, but it doesn't necessarily translate out where a guy like Tom Foley runs for governor and spends an awful lot of his own money.
It's one thing when you spend your own money, but it's another thing when you're looking for money. And when Mark's getting like $1,000 contributions from Lisa Wilson Foley and her husband, he changes his tune a lot. So the fast forward, the situation with John Rowland, Lisa Wilson Foley was connected to John Rowland. John Rowland just got indicted. And the media was saying, hey, look, everybody knew that Lisa Wilson Foley and John Rowland were in cahoots with this bad scheme. How can nobody else know? Everybody in Hartford, everybody across the state, all the politicals knew about this. Why was Mark Boughton taking contributions from Lisa Wilson Foley? Shouldn't we talk about this? Shouldn't we question him on this? And Mark said, hey, I didn't take any contributions. Now, if that happened in Danbury, and he did that, he made that letter to the editor to the News Times in response to the editorial that the News Times did, the News Times wouldn't come back and fact check that or anything like that. It would just let it stand. He did it to the New Haven Register. And what happened was the New Haven Register said, wait a second, yes, you did. You took contributions from Lisa Wilson Foley while you were exploring to run for governor. And then Mark, in his classic role, said, "Well, wait a second. Well, that wasn't in my run for governor. I was exploring a run for governor." She gave to that campaign.
Yeah.
Which is basically splitting hairs. And that's something that the people in the state of Connecticut does not like.
It was a contribution.
It was a contribution to its exploratory campaign. A little different, but you're splitting hairs. And what happens is, that's classic Mark Boughton. And once the public learns more and more about him splitting hairs like that, they're like, hey, wait a second, we can't trust this guy. We just can't trust this guy. And I'm not about tearing an individual down. I'm about telling the truth. And when it comes to Mark, whether it's Lisa Wilson Foley, illegal immigration, guns, his recent lawsuit in which his secretary is suing him on sexual harassment allegations and things of that nature, and the circumstances and the facts in that case is very disturbing. You just can't trust anything that comes out of his mouth. You can't trust anything that comes out of any politician's mouth, but especially with Mark Boughton. You better fact check two times.
I wouldn't be quite so cynical about Mayor Boughton or about politicians.
Well, trust
in general.
me, I have 10 years of this.
Okay. But one becomes jaded sometimes a little more than one should.
This is very true. And again, one of the great things about what I do on my website is that I give my opinion. But one of the great things about
is this Hat City Blog?
Hat City Blog. I do Hat City Blog, but I'm also the publisher of My Left Nutmeg, one of the largest progressive sites in the state. And one of the great
little clever take there.
Little name drop there.
Yeah, My Left
But
Nutmeg.
one of the great things that I do on my site, I give my opinion, but I also make very certain that I give all the documentation, all the evidence, whether it's documentations or video clips or things of that nature, to let you read everything that I'm reading that I use to form my opinion. I'll provide to you so you can form your own opinion. This is something that you don't get all the time in the media, and I think it's very important nowadays.
Hardly, and people can be kind of lazy when they read things and just take somebody's word for something. But as Al says, always double, triple check. Make sure that you're getting all the facts. And with that, we're going to have to wrap it up.
All right.
We will have you back again in the future.
It's great. I'm happy to be back here, and I'll be back here a lot more.
You and I and Marty Heiser will be doing a special on May 19th at 9 p.m., an hour-long live special. That should be pretty interesting.
That'll be a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. I'm David Stevenson, the esteemed Al Robinson, and enjoy your evening.